Welcome inside Lambeau Field. Matthew Coller along with Dane Mizutani, the Pioneer Press, here just outside the press box. And we have just returned from the Minnesota Vikings locker room and talking with Kevin O'Connell, who confirmed that it is indeed an Achilles injury for Kirk Cousins. And Dane, I got to say, this is one of the stranger feelings that I've ever had coming out of a game because they were so dominant and they won this game running away, which they have not done in a while. And I was all prepared to talk about what an excellent win this was, how the playoffs are now in sight, how Kirk Cousins has played some of the best football that I've ever seen him play, and Jordan Addison emerging as a star, the offensive line, another great day, weird special teams, great defensive performance, Brian Flores doing it again, Jordan Love probably not being the future for the Packers. That was what we were going to talk about. And then the injury tent came up and Kirk Cousins went in, and then the cart came out and he left. And at that moment, we're not sure like what's going on with Kirk Cousins. And as soon as we saw the replay, we knew. We saw it with Aaron Rodgers. We saw it with Kevin Durant. And it was the same exact injury in Achilles that was confirmed again by Kevin O'Connell. Heartbreak in the locker room. Emotional players. Emotional Kevin O'Connell. Jaron Hall steps in, gets strip sacked, completes a pass on third down. But what they do next at quarterback is now up in the air completely for this franchise in the short and the long term. So how do you want to react to this, Dane? I mean, this is quite the gut punch for the entire organization that believed that they had now reached a point where they were going to compete for the playoffs. And I would not have argued otherwise after this very impressive win. And now it's extremely hard to see them making something of the 2023 season.
Yeah, I think the word is devastating. And I don't think that's too much hyperbole. I think it's a devastating blow for the Vikings. Like you mentioned, this game was supposed to be us sitting here right outside the press box in Lambeau Field, talking about all the things that the Vikings did well, perhaps piling on to all the things that the Packers didn't do so well. But in that moment when Kirk Cousins drops back to pass, kind of pulls up lame, hops off the field, and like you said, goes to the injury tent, gets carted off the field, it just like you take the air out of the balloon really fully. The win in primetime last week, this was their chance to prove that was not a fluke. That was not an aberration. And by all accounts, they did. They did. For 60 minutes, they were the much better team. They dominated certain areas. Kirk Cousins parlayed a great performance last week into another great performance this week. You mentioned the offensive line. So everything that the Vikings did today was proof that, yes, this is a team to be taken seriously, which is why the injury is so devastating. I don't know how you move forward. And I know Kevin O'Connell will try and rally the troops and get them all to pull on the same rope and say this season is not lost. I know the players will say that outwardly to our faces. But I think if you just read between the lines, a lot of the emotions, just the faces of the guys in the locker room, they know the season's pretty much over. And it's really, really hard to kind of stomach that just with one play in 1 second, your season can go from maybe dark horse contender in the NFC to just a team that really has no direction.
And you think about all the hits that this man has taken over the years and all the times that he fought through pain. And we saw it in the Netflix documentary, but we always had a pretty good idea that with the offensive lines that he had, he was doing a lot off the field with his body to get back to as close as he could to 100% to play. And there's probably been downturns in Cousins' play throughout his career that have been injury related that he's never going to come out and say, hey guys, I was actually really banged up. Right. And he is not on the injury report very often because he's always a full go in practice and has done everything he ever could to be on the field. I mean, it's one of the things that I deeply respect about Kirk Cousins is how much he was willing to go through to be on the field. Not everybody is like that. Not everybody has that level of toughness that he's continued to fight through. And I also thought this year he showed another level of toughness through an 0-3 start. and leadership to bring them back in these last 2 games, where these are the types of games where this team is folded throughout the years, where it's like, okay, all you have to need is that one big win at Lambeau and then go get it. And then they don't. And somebody said this week, like, the most Vikings thing would be to beat San Francisco and then lose to Green Bay. And he was not going to let that happen. In fact, he could have had an even better stat line if his head coach had gone for a couple of 4th downs. I think the way they were moving the ball, he was throwing on time. He was playing confidently. He's dropping dimes to Jordan Addison left and right. TJ Hawkinson back in the mix. The offensive line putting on just a show throughout the game. And then he gets hurt on a play where nothing happens. And it's like a sick irony to this team is, I was being convinced throughout this game. I was thinking to myself that I'm going to write after this game, this is a playoff caliber team who is ready to get on a big run and even make some noise in the NFC, because the things they were doing are sustainable. Blocking for, Cousins. And then we see Jordan Addison take full advantage of this opportunity with Justin Jefferson out to become a star. And then it feels like it all goes up in flames in one moment. And look, if you had a Case Keenum as your backup quarterback, in 2017, we knew that Case Keenum could play in the NFL. We knew that he was a good player. It was surprising that he played as well as he did throughout the year, but we knew that he had started before and he'd put up numbers before and had some wins in the league. They are now left with an injured Nick Mullins, who we don't know when he's coming back. Sean Mannion is here. Jaron Hall is here. And they are also left with a trade deadline that is, in 2 days. So they have to make a decision fast. Do they want to try to trade for someone else's backup quarterback? But how do they even do that? So let's not get down that road just yet, though, because my head is swimming a little bit. So much to the point that I walked by the press box or by the locker room door on the way down. I let everybody right by the door because I've just, kind of shook by what has happened here in Green Bay. But just going back to your reaction to the locker room and what Kevin O'Connell said in his post-game press conference.
Listening to them talk, just Kevin O'Connell especially, you could tell I wouldn't go as far as say Kevin O'Connell was fighting tears, but you could just tell by hearing him that he was having a really hard time putting on a happy face to us. Started off his press conference, almost smiled when he said, like, good win for our team, because I think he knew deep down, like, this isn't what you guys want to hear about. You don't want to hear about how well we played today. You want to hear about Kirk. And then to hear him say, we fear it's an Achilles injury, kind of confirming everything that you think when you see that video, when you see him plant, when you see it kind of shoot up the calf. And none of us are doctors, and we're not claiming to be, but we've seen this enough to know, like, that looks like it's probably an Achilles. To hear Kevin O'Connell say it, just kind of a sobering moment. And, you can go around the locker room. Garrett Bradbury, I think he had a good quote saying, when asked how weird it was to not have Kirk Cousins on the field in the 4th quarter, he said, anytime since I've been here that the Vikings have been on the field, Kirk Cousins has been on the field, which is a perfect way to sum it up. It's a guy who, like you said, not on the injury report a lot, just a guy who fights his way through pain and has just an intense pain tolerance. I think Kevin O'Connell mentioned that too. This is going to have to be an injury that he literally can't come back from. It has nothing to do with pain tolerance, because if he can play through the pain, he's going to. You just hear all these things from these guys. Brian O'Neill nearly brought to tears when asked what Kirk's leadership has meant to this team. And I think that was probably the most poignant moment for me in the locker room, is hearing Brian O'Neill kind of try and answer what the leadership of Kirk Cousins meant, and then just having to stop and basically shoo us away and say, like, I can't do it. I think his final words were, I respect him. I respect him a lot. And then he turned away because I think he knows as well as all of us know, like, that's it. It's over.
And when you think about how much, and I know he's alive. So, like, I'll keep this in mind, but it is crushing.
It's great
for everybody, especially when the feeling was about to be, we're going to prove everybody wrong. We're going to be the outlier. We're going to go from 0-3 to the playoffs. Like, that would have been the vibe. And then to have that taken away from you, but it also matters so much how much Cousins has been through with all of these players.
Yeah.
I mean, the offensive lineman, the bond between the offensive lineman, the center, and Kirk Cousins. I mean, these guys have been blocking for him for a really long time. Darrisaw's whole career, O'Neill's whole career, Bradbury's whole career, Cleveland and Ingram too.
Yeah.
I mean, all those guys, KJ Osborne, Jordan Addison. I saw when I walked in the locker room, Jordan Addison just had his head in his hands.
Yeah.
And, after a win, you'll never see another locker room like that after a win. Everybody just sitting at their lockers kind of dazed that nobody was celebrating. We were standing right outside the locker room and couldn't hear a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, even when we walked in, there was some music playing, but nobody talking. And as soon as they turned the music down, you could hear anybody and what they were saying. And I agree with you that, Brian O'Neill, who is as tough as they get. I mean, look at the way he's come back from an Achilles injury himself, to be emotional when talking about Cousins, I think shows you how much they have bonded over the years as a group. And also, you're not going to find too many other people who have the capacity in the leadership in terms of getting the team lined up, getting the plays in. Like, you just have such a supreme confidence playing with him that he has a total mastery of this offense. And it was, there hasn't been too many times, even since O'Connell's got here, where I felt like it was just clicking and clicking and clicking, because O'Connell asks a lot from him. Mm-hmm. And he said that after the game. It's one of the reasons they put the wristband on him, I think, is because they ask so much from him. It was to try to get him to have to remember less, and so he could just play more free. And he was doing it. I mean, he was really rolling. And to have that taken away from the locker room, everybody knows the deal. And you're right. People try to say, well, the defense has to step up now and so forth. If you had a Gus Frerotte from back in the day, if you had a backup quarterback who's done it before, but you're asking now Jaron Hall or Nick Mullins or whatever to do it, I think that's a deeper part of this. Not only do they feel horrible for Kirk Cousins in the way that he was playing, but also they're aware that it's not really a next man up here, because the next men up have either lost pretty much all the games they started, like Nick Mullins, or have never played at all, like Jaron Hall.
Yeah. And I think that's when you look at the backup quarterback room the Vikings have, it's in some ways because Kirk's just durability, I don't want to say it's been taken for granted, but almost, you almost just want to get a guy as Kirk Cousins backup quarterback that he can bounce ideas off of, and he feels really good talking to. It's why Kirk Cousins and Sean Mannion worked so well, and Kirk Cousins and Kellen Mond did not. It's because Kirk, as a quarterback, wants his backup quarterback to be a good study partner who can, talk shop with him. And that's what the Vikings have in Nick Mullins. Those two get along tremendously well. But what the Vikings do not have in a backup quarterback, and I know we're going to get into Jaron Hall, so I don't want to say this kid can't play, but what we've seen so far, he's going to be asked to do way more than he's ever been asked to do in his football life. And it's fair to wonder if he can handle all of that right now as a rookie. This is a guy who was struggling to kind of call plays in training camp. And now he's going to be kind of thrust into, the spotlight, taking over for Kirk Cousins. You look at this backup quarterback room, you look at who's coming up the chute. I think Kevin O'Connell tried to almost push hey, Nick Mullins is coming back. Don't worry. It might not be Jaron Hall all this time. We might have Nick Mullins too. But this is no disrespect to either Nick Mullins or Jaron Hall, but you just can't feel good about those guys coming in and the guy that is leaving the team. Kirk Cousins has been a polarizing figure in Minnesota since he got here. And I think that's what comes with the contract. That's what comes with not having the immediate success that people thought was coming in the wake of the Case Keenum year. But I think what he's proven to all of us over the last two and a half years, even to his biggest haters, is that he's a really good quarterback in the league. Just as far as being a person who can play the position, there aren't many guys in the league better than him. I know we get into kind of the nitty gritty with the contract, what it means, how you build a team, but in a vacuum, Kirk Cousins is almost as good as it gets at the position outside of the top of the top, the Patrick Mahomeses, the Josh Allens, whatever. So to lose a guy like that, you're not just losing a leader, a revered guy in the locker room, you're losing one of the better quarterbacks in the league too. And now you're asking a guy who hasn't had much success as a fill-in guy in Nick Mullins and a guy who has not played at all really in Jaron Hall to kind of step up and fill the void. It's just really tough to see how anything positive is coming down the chute for the Vikings at this point.
It really is, and that is not an indictment on Jaron Hall so much. He was never meant to even be the backup
Right.
quarterback. I mean, it was supposed to be Nick Mullins, who is a proven backup in the league, but there's tiers to backups. There's the Case Keenum, Gus Frerotte tier of guys who you could see guiding a ship that's going well, and then below that is someone like Nick Mullins, who if they have to play too many games, like if they had to play 3 or 4, okay, like if this suddenly turned around and was like not that bad of an injury, which is not going to happen, but if it did, then you'd say, all right, well, maybe they can survive this with some of the opponents that they're coming up by just putting in Nick Mullins, but that's not going to be the case. Right. And so they should just let Jaron Hall kind of sink or swim and see what they have there. And it's a great setup. It's a good line. It's a good coach. It's a good tight end who made a great play to put the game on ice there. But when you're talking about having to beat NFL teams that are in the middle of the league like you are, teams like Atlanta, teams like New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans, at last check, had one of the best passing defenses in the league. That's going to be a tough one. You have to beat Russell Wilson. Even a broken version of him is still a guy who can put up some points and move the ball. So suddenly you go from Kirk is the better quarterback in almost every game the rest of the way. You can debate Kirk versus Jared Goff, but the whole rest of the way, they only play one quarterback who is decidedly better, and that's Joe Burrow.
Right.
And, he's been banged up a little bit this year. This year is, I think, going to be defined by all of the injuries that quarterbacks have faced throughout the entire NFL. But the ironic thing is just that, we've talked so much about the Kirk coaster and the ups and downs of Kirk Cousins throughout his time here. But what we just were witnessing, I was sitting here thinking, I don't know if I've seen him play better. I mean, because it was not just like in 2019, he played really well, but they were trying to kind of limit him, give the ball to Dalvin Cook, run play actions, and try to hit some deep shots. But what Kevin O'Connell did with Kirk Cousins is he said, I'm leaning in. This is a passing football team. I mean, he didn't even know what they did running wise. He was like, oh, maybe we could have run the ball a little better. It was like, actually, Kevin, your running game was horrendous today, but it doesn't matter. Because you've leaned into Kirk Cousins so much. They've put so much on his plate. They've made it so complicated for him. And yet he was distributing the football all over the place. It was looking, and I'm not making this comparison, but it was looking like Drew Brees-ish in the way that he was moving the ball today and last week against San Francisco to his playmakers. And then it's just taken away in a second. And I feel like Cousins was kind of having one of those weird things that happens with quarterbacks sometimes where the older they get, the better they get. And we saw a better version of him last year and a more comfortable version. And the bond also between him and O'Connell, that was not the case under Mike Zimmer. And it felt like this growth was actually real with Cousins, even though I'm always the one to kind of say, like, I don't know, is he really different? But there have been a lot of things that have looked different with him. And the supporting cast is as good as it gets in the entire NFL. And to have it taken away means, a lot of this could end up very well going to waste. And you end up with, 6 or 7 wins or something, which I know some of you are going to celebrate because of the draft status and all that. But I'll tell you, like, not like this, though. I mean, this is not how anybody wanted that to happen. That is a whole separate discussion about moving on and drafting a quarterback and everything else. This is not the way you want it to happen. The way that they would have wanted this season to go and would have, I'm sure, gotten all of you on board eventually was turn this around from 0-3 and make the playoffs. And instead, now we're here talking about where are they going to end up being, through the rest of the year with this.
Yeah, you have to have some nuance when you talk about this, right? It's like, I think me and you really align on the fact that, like, every time Kirk has played well in the past, we've wanted him to do it again and do it again. And pretty consistently, he hasn't. That's why you've called it the Kirk coaster. But the nuance exists in, like, wanting them to maybe trade Kirk Cousins or move on from Kirk Cousins at the end of this year is wholly different than celebrating. And there's going to be some people who I'm sure are saying, well, now we get to tank and rebuild. And it's like, it's okay to just be a regular person and look at this guy and say, like, he just suffered a devastating injury, like, late in his career. He's going to be 36 and now he has to rehab an Achilles probably. Like, so when you look at just the big picture, if the people who have just been banging the drum, move on from Cousins, if they get that, like, I guess I'm happy for you, but like, it's not the way it was intended to happen. Like, if you were going to move on from Kirk Cousins, I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah gave himself this out by not extending him last March, by saying we're going to let this contract run out. You were going to get that anyway. I think they were going to move on from him, barring, an incredible run and wins in the playoffs and an extension. I think you were going to get this natural progression of moving on to the next guy. But I just know that there's going to be just like a section of the fan base that is kind of celebrating this horrible injury, and it kind of rubs me the wrong way. I've been as big of a Kirk Cousins critic as there is out there over the course of his tenure in Minnesota. But to your point earlier, it really did feel like maybe this was a turning of the corner. It felt like the game against San Francisco at home in primetime was a turning of the corner for the entire team. And it kind of felt like it is like a microcosm of Kirk Cousins perhaps turning the corner, and then he goes out and does what he does today. I just think we deserved better to see it through, to either be right or wrong, to continue to ride that Kirk coaster. But now it just kind of feels like it's all been taken away. So you just kind of leave this game kind of shaking your head. You're feeling kind of shook at kind of the repercussions of everything that just happened.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me is that they had made this statement about competitive rebuild. And when they started 0-3, I talk about conflicted. I was like, well, 0-3 might be good for you. If you end up trading Kirk Cousins and so forth, maybe that would be good for you, is to lose all those games. Mm-hmm. But I also thought, well, you said you were going to be competitive, and it's not good if you're not. And after coming back from that, and even playing a strong game against Kansas City that they had chances to win, a strong game against Los Angeles that they had chances to win, I was becoming much more sold on the idea of you can't waste a year of everybody's lives when you have Christian Darrisaw, Justin Jefferson coming back, just, to trade Kirk Cousins or something like that. Like, you have to, we were talking about potentially buying, like calling Washington and seeing if Montez Sweat is available, or seeing if Chase Young is available, and adding to this football team, because what we've seen from Brian Flores is this man knows how to coach a freaking defense. Mm-hmm. I mean, Jordan Love, okay, he struggles, and he missed some open receivers today, and he threw a pretty gnarly interception that, they had pretty much known that he was going to throw, based on what Josh Metellus told us after the game. They knew at a certain look he was going to throw that pass, and he just jumped in front of it. So, okay, competition matters here, but even against San Francisco, and they've played extremely well against Chicago and Carolina, bad teams, as a defense. And so all of a sudden there's this momentum of this defense with Flores, and Danielle Hunter grabs another sack today, and DJ Wanham gets another sack today. And maybe eventually you're talking about Davenport coming back. And all of a sudden I'm getting convinced that it's not just like a bad defense that played a couple of teams, that all of a sudden when you hold the Panthers down, when you hold 13 points, and then how many was it against Chicago? 12 or something. Mm-hmm. And then 10, like, this is what you should do. You could say they're bad offenses, but they've held down these bad offenses. It's been so impressive to see. And if we were talking about, because I was thinking about today, like, this defense, they might end up cracking the top 10, or like being just outside of that top 10 with the quarterbacks that they have coming up. And that's where it looked like that path was going to be so there. And then you're not talking as much about the future. We can think about that later, but then it becomes a week to week. Oh, how are they going to game plan against this team? And, how are they going to match up? And this is a big game. And there's a lot of excitement to that. And then it's just ripped away. And I think that's how a lot of Vikings fans, there's some sickos who would, are happy that this has happened or whatever. But like, when you talk about like the fans and how they were feeling about this, buying into this team and having that excitement ripped away from them, it's not something Vikings fans have never seen before, but it is sort of a new chapter in a team that was just starting to convince you they were going somewhere with this season, and then having that taken away. So let's move on to the next phase of the conversation, which is, what do they do with the quarterback position?
I think at least in the short term, and I guess the short term is the next 2 days, because you have to decide right now. You can't kick the can down the road and say, let's decide later if you want to trade for a quarterback, because there's 2 days to do it. The trade deadline is Tuesday. So I guess in the short term, they need to decide, all right, is there a backup quarterback out there that we want to go get? Kyler Murray, that's not going to happen. I don't think they can physically make it work with the cap. I also just don't see them making like a huge swing move like that. It sounds cool. If this was Madden, I would, hop on and go try and trade with the Cardinals and add whatever picks and salaries that it took to get it done, and eventually force a trade with the computer and make Kyler Murray the quarterback of the Vikings. But that's not what's going to happen. So then you have to kind of parse through which backup quarterbacks exist that potentially could come in and run this offense. What I think is going to end up happening is that Jaren Hall is going to be the starting quarterback next weekend in Atlanta, and you're just going to try and see what you got in him. I don't think Kevin O'Connell says the expectation will not change. Like, we are going to expect to win every game. We're going to expect to compete, moving forward for playoff positioning and all of that. But I think deep down, like, you just want to see if you have anything in Jaren Hall. Like, it's easy to say, all right, well, maybe they have Brock Purdy. We don't know that they don't. I just know what we've seen out of Jaren Hall in training camp, in the preseason. He's coming from a spread offense at BYU where he never even had to call plays in the huddle to calling plays in the huddle with perhaps a very, very good play caller, but someone whose language and verbiage and playbook is really complex. So there's a growth that's going to be needed. And I think he's taken steps in that direction since being drafted, since struggling to kind of comprehend everything in training camp to getting in the game today. Everyone was high praise of Jaren Hall and the way he conducted himself in the fourth quarter, and in some ways helped the Vikings hold on for that win. And there was one play that he made, a throw to TJ Hawkinson, that I think helped them eventually run out the clock. But all of this is to say, I think Jaren Hall is going to be the option or the decision next week against Atlanta. And I think Jaren Hall should be the decision moving forward as well. I think when Nick Mullins is healthy, you should still go to Jaren Hall and you should see what you have in Jaren Hall. Because we've seen what we have in Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins is a okay backup in the league. He's a backup, like you said earlier, who, if he has to play 4 games, you think he could maybe win 2 of them. And I think that's like a tier of a backup quarterback who could maybe win 50% of the games in the short term if they have to. I think that's Nick Mullins. There's at least some mystery with Jaren Hall, and I think you at least want to find out. The only way, and we were talking about this as we were walking back upstairs, that you would have to make that switch if you decide Jaren Hall is the guy moving forward. The only way you switch back to Nick Mullins is if Jaren Hall can't play the position at all. And we don't know that he can't yet. So I think he deserves this opportunity. Unless you're going to go trade for someone, I think Jaren Hall has to be the quarterback moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, because if Hall can't operate the offense at a competent level, which we're going to find out next week, then you have to go to somebody else because, one, again, you can't waste everybody's time here. Like, you want Jordan Addison to get the football and make plays because, my gosh, again, think about all the things we would have been talking about. Like, Jordan Addison is a freaking star right now.
Yes.
And just like starting in the Kansas City game, just somebody pushed the button and now he is a star in the league just like that. So, I don't know if Jefferson's coming back or not. I would assume that Jefferson still comes back regardless of the situation because that's the type of player he is. But if Hall struggles to the point where he can't get those guys the football, then you have to make a change to Nick Mullins. And I know that you talk about tanking or whatever, but not when you have these types of players. You want to be able to, continue to evaluate, continue for guys to improve and to run their offense and give themselves a chance to win each week, which Nick Mullins, we know, can do based on what he did in San Francisco and the other times we've seen him play. He got in a little bit last year in Green Bay, made a couple throws. The same with Chicago. I think he played the second half of that game last year and looked like a competent quarterback. And these are some teams that you could potentially beat still. I mean, Atlanta looks like they might be playing their backup quarterback, except for he's a guy who's won a lot more in the league in Taylor Heineke, but still, I mean, that's not all that impressive, that they're going to play against him. But, going on the road, even to Atlanta, is a big challenge. So I think we'll know by next week if Jaren Hall is up for this. I just think that asking him to be up for this is a lot because he was supposed to come in, have a year to develop. I mean, he carries himself extremely well, and I think he understands football. and understands how to line people up. And Kevin O'Connell said the other guys on offense were impressed with how he came in, got everybody set up. Like, he's clearly like mature and capable of handling some things, but he also like got strip sacked right away, So it's like, I don't know what to really expect there. There's another option other than just a backup, of which there are a dozen names you could try to go for. There's another option of trying to trade for someone who might be a future option, knowing that Kirk Cousins might not be back look how long some of those Achilles injuries take. I know Aaron Rodgers is trying to tell everyone he's going to come back, but this one's 8 weeks into the season. And a lot of times it takes an entire year. There's no even guarantee when he could be back, if he would be back. O'Neal was not back until basically the start of the season when he had his Achilles injury. These take a long time depending, and his was not even that severe.
Partial.
His was only a partial, and it took him from the playoffs all the way until that was it's like 8 months basically with a partial tear. This one looks like it might be worse based on, the video. The only guy who would be in a position to trade for that he could be a part of the future would be Mac Jones. Does something like that interest you at all?
I mean, I turned my head like this for anyone who's watching, anyone who's listening. It made me turn my head to the side because, the name interests me. And I think it's a cluster of a situation in New England. And I think at times Mac Jones has looked okay. I think with a young, advanced play caller like Kevin O'Connell, like he could probably get the most out of Mac Jones. If it's not going to cost me an arm and a leg, that could interest me. Sure. If it's going to cost me my first round pick next year, no, I won't do that. I would much rather just try and find the next Mac Jones who will be on his rookie contract much longer than the actual Mac Jones. If you can get him for a reasonable dollar or draft capital amount, not dollar, why not pull the trigger there? Because then you have 8 weeks to kind of figure out, do you want to move forward with this guy or not? He is the type of player that I think if you're going to go out and trade for, that one makes sense. Mac Jones, like that typecast of guy who has maybe been, in a situation that wasn't the most enviable and hasn't had success, but you think there's something there. That is the type of player I think would make sense if you are going to go to hit the trade market. But at the same time, I am almost content to move forward. If the price is too much with the rookie quarterback that I drafted in the 5th round this year, that I took time to develop over the last 6 months, and it just at least see what we have and then make another decision next year. I think if you're trading for someone like Mac Jones or actually Mac Jones, you're almost committing to them. So are you ready to do that with 48 hours to decide? It's interesting for sure. But I don't know if that's something I would have the gumption to do right now.
Yeah, I think that if you were giving up something like a 3rd round pick for Mac Jones, and the funny thing is, I would love to give this more space and say we'll talk about this later this week, but the trade deadline's Tuesday. So we kind of got to talk about this right now. It's it feels a tad inappropriate considering that he just got hurt, but that's the reality, right? So with the Mac Jones idea, or, Trey Lance is being thrown out there in the comments, the one thing is there's some upside to it. And the upside is the potential that the guy ends up being a good fit. And you mentioned New England, Jones came into the league and played well.
Right.
And then Bill Belichick undid that team as if he hated his team. He just gave him no receivers. Their offensive line is horrendous. He had Matt Patricia as their play caller. The Vikings are the complete opposite of this, what Mac Jones has had. So if you could trade for someone that might have some upside, but you are not really locked into, if you're not giving up a super high draft pick, that would seem advantageous. Trey Lance would seem advantageous just from the idea that someone would actually play Trey Lance at football. And anybody else along the lines of, and I see you sending all the different names and everything else, but the Andy Dalton, Teddy Bridgewater. I don't see why the Lions would want to help you make the playoffs potentially if they gave you Teddy Bridgewater. But along the lines of those journeyman veteran quarterbacks, I'm not sure I really see the point. Maybe they're going to argue, hey, when we get Jefferson back, even an Andy Dalton could get us to the playoffs. But you're asking Andy Dalton to show up halfway through the season. If you don't win next week, then you're talking about like still playing from behind, fighting for the last playoff spot, and just kind of for what? You'd rather just play Jaren Hall. So yeah, I know there's those types of options of the Andy Dalton type. Maybe Andy Dalton on this team turns back the clock. I don't know. But Trey Lance and Mac Jones are the only guys who might be available who you could actually see being part of the future if everything clicked properly. And you're not really locked into either. So you could also draft a quarterback, and then you're kind of like taking a bunch of shots at it, which I think is fine if that's the way they wanted to approach it. It's just, can you work out a trade this quickly? Can you get on the phone basically tonight with whoever you think might be potentially trading you a quarterback, and then try to do it? And how much are you willing to give up? And how much do you believe that somebody can come here and either become the future quarterback if it's a Trey Lance or something, or who can save your season if it's an Andy Dalton type, which, the odds, there's still a 50-50 playoff team right now. So the odds, if you bring in an Andy Dalton, are what, like 30%? If you do it for a 5th round pick, is it worth it? Like, there's all this math that kind of has to go into this decision now. And, we're not really used to this. This is not something we've dealt with.
Yeah. I think you've kind of sold me on the Mac Jones deal. Or the Mac Jones type of deal. And there's only a handful of players, not even a handful. There's like a couple of players where that actually is like a thing where you're essentially redrafting a guy midway through his rookie contract and just saying, all right, let's figure this one out. And if it doesn't work, then we'll just draft in 2 years again. Like, I think that one makes way more sense because at least you have like the appeal of upside. And what could this guy be down the road? I think that's why you've kind of talked me into that kind of trade. Because if you can go out and get a guy who was drafted in the 1st round 3 years ago, who some people wanted the Vikings to draft 3 years ago, or you can go get Trey Lance or someone like that. By nature, they have more, at least on the surface, talent or appeal or upside than a guy like Jaren Hall, who's a 5th round pick. So if you're just committing to a young guy and saying, what do we got? Maybe it makes more sense to go out and get a young guy that you've probably potentially scouted in the past and you've definitely looked at and kicked around the idea. If those guys are available, we don't know if they are. But Mac Jones should be available. The Patriots are going nowhere fast. Trey Lance should be available because Dallas traded basically nothing for him to just bring him in. That would pique my interest more than a veteran guy, whoever. I mean, there's in the comments, there's people throwing out whatever veteran quarterback backup you can think of, because I don't know what your ceiling is with those guys. We're not saying if you trade for Mac Jones or Trey Lance, they're going to win the Super Bowl this year. But if you're trading for Andy Dalton or Josh Dobbs, now that Kyler's coming back, you're hoping to win the Super Bowl this year. You're hoping to make the playoffs and go on a run. And I just don't see, you're just kind of putting like a Band-Aid on a leak and hoping it doesn't start leaking again, even though it probably will. Whereas the other option at least gives you a little bit more upside and potential and intrigue down the road. So, yeah, I mean, talking about a trade like this an hour and a half after Kirk pops his Achilles, but like, yeah, the trade deadline's in 48 hours, less than. So it's kind of now or never. And I'm sure the conversation that we're having right now in real time is at least something that Kwesi is thinking about right now. Which guy is available? Which guy makes sense? Which type of player could we go get if we want to hit the trade market? It's just the league keeps going, and it just sounds crass, but it does. And I think that's the Vikings have to turn the page to Atlanta, but they also have to figure out who they are turning the page to Atlanta with.
I mean, what an unbelievably difficult situation, just like to flip a switch and then all of a sudden you are in panic mode as an organization of like, what are we going to do? And people are asking about Kyler Murray. I have no idea if Arizona is interested in trading Kyler Murray or if they think that that's their franchise quarterback and they are going to try to get Marvin Harrison Jr. as a receiver for him in the draft. I don't know how they're thinking. Of course, I've always been intrigued by the idea of Kyler Murray with this setup because I think he had one of the poorest setups in the 1 year where it was pretty good. He was in the MVP race through about 12, 13 weeks. So there's that. But how do you pull that trade off like right now, today? Like, is that possible? And then if you want to bring a little levity to the situation or whatever, Tom Brady. Anybody want Tom Brady? Like, would if Tom? Let me just throw this out there. If Tom Brady called and he said, "I really want to play for you guys. Like, just let me come play." Are you gonna tell the GOAT no? Are you gonna be like, "Tom, we're good. I would say yes.
I would say
I'd
yes.
let him play.
The Wilfs would say yes. They'd sell 1 million Tom Brady jerseys like in like 5 minutes. Like, yeah, that would be fun. But hey, we're just throwing names out there now. Like, but that one is like it's like not out of the realm of possibility because he's still probably one of the top 20 quarterbacks on the planet, and maybe a top 15 if he gave him like 3 weeks to get ready and healthy. Yeah, that one would interest me more than maybe any of them. If he called me and said, "Hey, can I play for you?" I would say, yeah, absolutely.
The state of quarterback play is so bad in the NFL right now, and so many people are hurt that if you had Tom Brady, I think he's a top 15. I think he's a top 15. Like, he wasn't good last year, but he also didn't have this. Like, they had offensive line issues and everything else. And this just seems completely silly. And yet now I'm convinced this is a great idea. Actually, like, mark it down, the 40-minute mark of this podcast where I said, absolutely call Tom Brady right now. Did I ever in a million years think walking into Lambeau today that I'd be walking out being like, call Brady? Like, no, I can't say that I expected that. But just, you may find that absurd. But last year, the 49ers were ready to call Ben Roethlisberger and see if he wanted to play if they had beaten the Eagles and gone to the Super Bowl. So, maybe Big Ben, Brady, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees. Drew Brees has hair now. So Matt Ryan. Oh, wait a minute. What? No, he looked too bad. He looked too bad last year, but maybe. I mean, if you're an old dude looking for one more shot and you've been working out, you've been throwing the ball over them mountains and stuff, is there any better team in the league to join to give it like one last go at being iconic? If you're like Matt Ryan and you join a team halfway through and get them to the playoffs, like, I mean, we're getting Jefferson back, Addison, Hawkinson, 2 great tackles. Like, you can't ask for anything better. So, I mean, maybe this feels like completely ridiculous at this point, but I don't think it's insane to think that they'll get some calls.
And you should absolutely exhaust every option now if you're Kwesi over the next 48 hours. Like, I think we're saying Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, we're saying it a little bit tongue in cheek, but not really. Like, it's like, these are things that you have to consider. You have to consider every single option now. You have to unturn every single stone. And I think it's going to come even more real Monday morning when you wake up and you say, what the hell just happened? We just lost our franchise quarterback. And then you're saying, oh, I have 24 hours now because you were waking up in Monday morning in this made up situation that I'm talking about now to decide what you want to do moving forward. If there is no move, Jaren Hall is the guy as far as I'm concerned. But I think over the next 48 hours now, 24 hours when you wake up on Monday morning, you have to unturn every single stone that exists, because this roster is too good to just say, let's throw it in reverse. It's why tanking never really made sense for this team in the first place. It's why it sounded cool. Like, yeah, let's go get Caleb Williams and Drake May and pair him with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson in a great offensive line, at least tackle-wise, moving forward. But all those names I just named are the reason that the tank never made sense in the first place, because you cannot take a year for granted in the NFL, which is why it would make sense to go out and canvas every single option that's possible until the trade deadline passes on Tuesday. If the trade deadline passes on Tuesday with no deal, Jaren Hall it is. If the trade deadline passes and you have Tom Brady walking into the TCO Performance Center in Egan, woo, this podcast is going to do big numbers.
There is nothing I'll ever say won't happen. I mean, after Brett Favre
NFL's so weird.
Yeah, after Brett Favre came here and the roof collapsed the next year, you can never say anything won't happen. And I mean, you've got all sorts of names popping up now. Stan Humphries is definitely the funniest. I think Stan is probably a little too old, but Marcus Mariota, we've got Ryan.
Don't tease me with that
Ryan Fitzpatrick. I don't think Ryan Fitzpatrick. But you guys are very funny in the comments with all the names. Who was the one? There was one that somebody meant. Oh, Carson Wentz. I'm just gonna pass on that. Like, I don't see it any better than Nick Mullins at this point. Like,
no one likes
teams.
that. Like,
Yeah.
I think when any locker room he goes into, apparently that goes the other way. You have a good culture going right now. So whoever you pick, like, you want them to fit that mold.
You could see it. I mean, you could see. I don't want to totally dismiss it. Like, I want to say almost every name out loud except for Doug Flutie, who's being being mentioned by you guys. But I want to say the name out loud so they don't like acquire someone in a day, and then like, you guys didn't even talk about how great it would be to have Carson Wentz. Maybe that to me falls under the category of it's probably not going to take you anywhere, so I don't really see the point. But look, we have no idea at this point how they're going to go about it, or if they're going to go out and try to get someone. But now I am deeply rooting for Tom Brady to come here. It would just be, no matter how it worked out, it would be one of the coolest things to ever happen, of just Tom Brady walking through those doors. Frank Reich, yeah, you guys are really in your bag now with all the backup quarterbacks. There's other things that happen in this football game that may be worth a quick discussion if we can.
Yeah.
Number one being, what do you think happened to Greg Joseph today?
I don't know, but he missed a field goal, had a field goal blocked, and then his biggest mistake of the day might have just been kicking the ball out of bounds on the kickoff. Like, the Packers cannot move the ball before halftime. I don't even think they had a first down to this point. And Greg Joseph just banged the ball 20 yards to the right, and it went out of bounds. Not a good day for him. Not a good 2-week stretch for him after pushing the extra point wide right in prime time, missing another, in prime time. You want to chalk it up to just a bad day, I guess. Lambeau is weird, but it was a disaster. The kicking game was. If the Vikings were in a close game, and they weren't because the Packers stink, the kicking game would have been a huge talking point because it was not good today. And I'm trying to fight against whiplash, and it's hard because, especially kickers in Minnesota, it seemed to get everyone real riled up. But he would be on notice as far as I'm concerned. Like, you don't want to screw with that operation too much, but how many more times are we going to watch him push the thing wide right? Now he was 9 of 11 going into this week, and his 2 misses had come from 50 and I think 57 at Soldier Field. So it's not like he stinks, but it can go sideways for kickers pretty quickly. So it's something to keep an eye on for sure.
Everything that you just talked about, I didn't care about at all. And I asked you the question, but like, not everything just pales so much in comparison. I was just like, I don't care about the kicker anymore. Like, that, you're totally right that I would have been like, what is going on? Like, should they get kickers in here? This is weird. But I'm like,
but now Tom Brady on the mind.
All I'm doing is just reading the names that the comment section's coming up with, like Kellen Mond. But there is an interesting comment there, as funny as you guys are being. Will Levis was on the board. And look, I'm not saying one game means anything. It looks like most of his touchdowns were just Hail Marys that fell into somebody's hands, but just like launching the ball up. We may end up coming back to that. We talked about it when Mac Jones had a good season, and then it kind of fell off. And then we haven't had that discussion about drafting them or not. And look, they got Darisaw instead of Mac Jones. They got Jordan Addison instead of Will Levis. So of course those players are worth a ton on their rookie contracts, but also Will Levis just played amazing football. I would have never believed that, by the way. After we saw him in practice, we were like, that's the guy. Okay. I could see why he wasn't picked high, but if he turns out to be a dude for Tennessee, that might end up being one that they do end up regretting for a long time. I mean, they had opportunities to draft a bunch of these guys, whether it was like Kenny Pickett or Mac Jones, and they always like, no, we don't really like that guy. We don't really like that guy. And they've been mostly right. And now, the guy comes out and looks amazing. And, it's true that if they drafted Levis, they would not have Addison. They would still have Justin Jefferson, and a quarterback is worth like 5 times as much as a wide receiver. So, I mean, you could say you'd rather have Addison, but it's just a fact that having a quarterback is way more important, that you can find other receivers, as this team does all the time. And quarterbacks, this team does not exactly do all the time. So I don't know. That's massive overreaction to just one thing. But it is funny that we tried to talk about something else. And I was like, okay, stop. Let's talk about the other thing again. The only other thing, and again, it seems pointless to talk about now, is Kevin O'Connell and game management. Every week there seems to be things where we're like, huh? Why? And he talked about wanting to get off to a hot start, and I thought, well, nothing's better at getting off to a hot start than a touchdown. They were moving the ball, and on a 4th and 1 and a 4th and 3, they're kicking field goals. And I feel like he's been a little bit spooked around the goal line. And again, it doesn't really matter that much now because there's just this much bigger discussion. But I think that eventually we'll get back to someday talking about whether he can manage the play calling and the game management, because even if they had won that game with Kirk fully healthy, we would have been probably going after him a little bit about some of that stuff. Delays of game, timeouts, the operation still remains a little wonky.
Yeah, it does. I definitely wanted him to go for it on that 4th and 1 early in the game. Frankly, his explanation didn't really compute to me. Like you said, you want a fast start. The fastest way to start is by scoring a touchdown against a team that's not very good, especially at home. Take the wind out of their sails. Instead, you settled for a 42-yard field goal at Lambeau Field in the conditions you missed, and the home crowd was momentarily in it before Jordan Love went 3 and out again. But yeah, that's one that is a little weird to me because it does feel like he's been spooked by results. And I would like you to almost stick with just if this is your process, just stick with it. If you want to be a guy who's really aggressive in new school and goes for it on 4th and 1, like you did in the Chiefs game, do it. Just stick with it. I get why he's flustered by the lack of success in the low red zone. But I think that's proof of, areas of the game where he still needs to grow as a coach too. So,
and at some point, I also think that we need to talk about whether it's the running scheme or the running backs. It's the running back with Madison.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no burst there. But even Cam Akers, who looked much quicker, at the end of the day, he ends up averaging like 2 yards a carry.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the case last year. That's been the case so far this year. And if they are going to win games, because we have mostly declared that they either need to get Tom Brady or the season's over. If they are going to win games, it has to be now with running the ball in defense. They can't really run the ball. I think it's probably more they have to just pass it more often to short passes, like quick passes to Jefferson when he returns, if he returns, and Addison, and get the ball to Hockenson and so forth. Because I just think this running game is something they need to completely overhaul and look at in the future. I just don't think it's ever going to be good. Before we wrap up, though, because again, I don't know, like Jordan Love is real quick. We think Jordan Love is just bad, and the Packers are completely screwed, and they're going to win like 4 games this year, like that level bad, right? We all agree on that.
Yeah, this felt like an inflection point game for the Packers with Jordan Love. It felt like maybe a game where if Jordan Love comes out, puts the team on his back, beats the rivals, and at least shows a pulse that you're like, all right, maybe this is the guy moving forward. Instead, he didn't pick up a first down until late in the first half, and just was completely ineffective at the end of the game when, frankly, it was on the table for the Packers. When Kirk Cousins got hurt, Jaron Hall came in and immediately got strip sacked. If Jordan Love just throws a touchdown there, then you're scared if you're Minnesota. He didn't, because he's just not very good. And I don't really think there's much else that needs to be discussed when we look at Jordan Love. It's not like people who want to jump off the Bryce Young bandwagon right away, even though I have questions about that guy. Does he have the stature to succeed? This is a guy who's learned from Aaron Rodgers, who, love him or hate him, is one of the best to ever do it. And you've learned under him for 3 seasons now, and you're not a rookie, and you've had experience in the system, and you come out and you just have nothing really. So I don't need any more Jordan Love. I don't think the Packers need any more Jordan Love. This felt like a game that they now turn the page and start thinking, all right, who's available in the 2024 draft?
Yeah, it looks so much like Drew Lock to me, where he'll make a few throws a game where you're just like, whoa, man, wow, that is amazing. And then the rest of it there's no operation there. There's no rhythm and timing and decision making. By the way, just comment section saying that it should never be discussed about Will Levis versus Jordan Addison. The most valuable wide receiver in the league is probably worth a fifth of what a great starting quarterback is worth. So yeah, it's going to be discussed. I mean, look, who's been more impressed by Jordan Addison than me? Like from day one of training camp. Oh my gosh, this dude can play. And yet at the same time, I would give up any receiver in the league, including Justin Jefferson, for a top quarterback. I mean, right? If someone's, and here's how you know, if someone said you can have Josh Allen for Justin Jefferson, you're going to say yes. So that's just the reality of the thing. And also when your quarterback who's older gets hurt, and then, another team on the same day drafts the quarterback that you could have drafted, and he's not under contract and all those things, then yeah, that's something we're going to be discussing. It was one game for Will Levis though. So I'm not saying that like, oh my gosh, idiots, just that it's something that we're going to kind of remember. That was on the table. They decided to go a different direction and so forth. Do you think this means for sure Kirk Cousins is done in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think it means he's for sure done in Minnesota. And I know nothing. This is completely conjecture, but I would not be surprised if he's just done. Like, this is a guy who's put his body through hell. We saw it in the Netflix documentary. He's wanted to squeeze all the juice out of this orange as humanly possible. And you got to give him credit. He's done that. He's put himself in position consistently to do that. But this is not just an injury you come back from in 6 weeks and say, like, all right, let's get back on the horse and try again. This is a devastating injury, like for the team, for the franchise, but also for the guy that suffered the injury, because this is not an injury that you just recover from overnight or in 6 months even. And not to mention, he's going to be 36. Like, it feels like if Kirk Cousins just played his last game in the NFL, I don't know, but it wouldn't shock me if midway through this rehab process, he says, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to go hang out with Julie and the kids. I've made enough money. I'm going to go move to that house in Michigan and just hang out. And frankly, if that's what he decides, more power to him, because he's had a great career numbers wise, an insanely great career earnings wise. So if this is it, I mean, I can't blame him.
We've seen other quarterbacks hang it up around this age.
Yeah.
I mean, he just has not really looked his age, so we never think about it with the durability factor, but this one is different.
Yeah.
This one is very much different. I guess, yeah, we're going to have to see about that. But I agree that coming back from this injury, I mean, Dan Marino did it once upon a time, but there's no guarantee at all that he could come back the same way. And already this is a guy who's lacking mobility, who needs every bit of his base to throw. We always talk about that, is when he gets set and throw. But, the velocity, I don't think has been really the same. I think it's been more the mental processing and the accuracy that's been great. But yeah, I mean, this one could be it for him. Or, look, and here, I just want to make this point, since I'm just throwing out everything right now, is when in the offseason, you guys make fun of TJ Hawkinson, you guys talk about, oh, this player's selfish for negotiating his contract, whatever. Well, look what just happened today for a guy who doesn't have a contract for the future. That's why they do it. That's why they fight for every dollar, because this can end any day where, you're talking about just you step the wrong way, and then all of a sudden maybe your career might be over. So that's why all players should fight all the time for the biggest contracts that they can get, including Kirk Cousins, who I've never criticized for that, ever. Never criticized for him fighting for his last dollar. So last thing, we'll just put it this way. What do you think? You think it's just Jaren Hall and they play it out? Or actually give me your like 3 most likely scenarios.
My most likely scenarios, this is very boring, but they are Jaren Hall, Jaren Hall, Jaren Hall. I think it's really fun to talk about all the guys that they could trade for. Who do I want the most? No, if that's the question, it's Tom Brady, Trey Lance, Mac Jones. But what I think is going to happen is that the trade deadline will pass Tuesday. They will not have made a move. And the team that cares so much about culture and sticking with their guys, a la Alexander Madison getting more touches over Cam Akers, Dalton Reisner not seeing time over Ezra Cleveland or Ed Ingram, continues to stick with their guy, and they move forward with Jaron Hall and Nick Mullins, a combination of the two. That's what I think.
There's another conversation. Would you trade Danielle Hunter now?
I would. If I was the general manager, I would, because I think you have to be realistic with what this means for your season and your outlook. And if you can get a second-round pick for Danielle Hunter, that is probably better than scrapping for maybe the playoffs with whoever you have under center. So yeah, if someone called me and said, we'll give you a second-round pick for Danielle Hunter, I would do it. I would understand that it would probably piss off a lot of people in that locker room and the head coach. But as the general manager, my job would be to kind of look at this season and 3, 4, 5 seasons down the road. I think that would be a good move for the future of the team.
Well, I would go with, we'll call it the Tom Brady option, but it means everybody. Like if you could give me just because I want it, any of those guys that we named, Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, Drew Brees. If you're either a guarantee or almost a guarantee for the Hall of Fame,
come on down.
Come on down. Let's go. Jacoby Brissett's a name. I don't know. I don't need that guy. That's what I don't need. I don't need the like Nick Mullins, but slightly better. You just have Nick Mullins. So we'll see what happens. What a day. What a day.
What
here.
a day.
I just, you never know. That's why we come here. Like, because you just never know what's going to happen. So, very different vibe than I thought we'd be walking out with, but we'll just have to wait and see how they approach it, what they want to do. If there are people like Kevin O'Connell who want to push for another quarterback to come in here to give themselves a chance with the team that they have. If not, this has made things very, very interesting the rest of the way and into the future that we'll be talking about, of course, every day on the show. So there will be many more podcasts. I was thinking about just today, Dane, about how like you do the post game, and then we got Murph, Jeremiah Searles, Manny Hill, the roundtable with Andrew Kramer and Will Ragetz. If you don't like my opinions, there's many other people who have opinions on this show, and I'm super appreciative of having you here, Dane, to be able to break this down, because I needed someone to bounce back and forth of all the things that I was thinking about walking out of that locker room. So thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. Had a huge audience today. Really appreciate all you guys. And we will find out, as always, what happens next. But thanks for watching. And from Lambeau Field, we will catch you all next time.